viciously towards each other.
Well, these personal attacks, coded or otherwise, have really got to stop. I feel very strongly about that. I met my local party in Neath last night at our regular meeting, and they're fed up to the back teeth with it. They can't understand why senior figures in the party are being so self-indulgent, and others are indulging in personal attacks. And they've got to stop because, well, I don't know. You'll have to ask those making them. But what I do think is this, and it comes back to your first question, Peter. Parties that are divided or appear to be divided don't win the respect of the public. And there is actually a policy unity sweeping right across the party. There's no ideological schism. People may have their personal views about who would be the best person for this or that job. That's fair enough. There's no fundamental ideological argument of the kind that there was in the Tory party, for example, over Europe and other matters in the 1990s, which led to their defeat in 1997. So when you ask me, can we recover from this position? Yes, I can. I think we can. If we get on with the job, if we get back to work pretty soon, and we make sure that, like in Northern Ireland, I'm doing a job there as Secretary of State, the Prime Minister's gone to the Middle East today. These are the issues that the public expect us to give our attention and our priority and our energy to, not the kind of attacks that have filled the news pages and the airwaves over the past week or so.
Poll after poll shows, however, that the one thing that really has split the Labour Party is Iraq, is foreign policy. Can there be a recovery without the policy being changed?
Well, Iraq's been a very difficult issue for everybody, not least our government, and the Prime Minister showed a lot of courage in the position that he took, and we as a cabinet supported him, Gordon Brown included, but many people disagreed. But if people are suggesting that we should just turn our back and walk away from Iraq and leave the Iraqis at the mercy of insurgents and terrorists who are killing Iraqis more than they are, many more than they are soldiers from the international coalition, then I think that's profoundly wrong. I don't think we should slink away with our tail between our legs if that's what's been suggested. But I do think it's important that we build the peace and we build the stability and we support the emerging democracy in Iraq, and we don't have a victory for Al-Qaeda type terrorism.
I'm sure you'll agree that Charles Clarke is a very experienced politician. He's served Neil Kinnock as Chief of Staff. He's seen them all come and go. Perhaps the most worrying thing in many people's eyes that he's said is that Gordon Brown isn't a collegiate person. If you're interested in cabinet government, surely we need the next Prime Minister has to be somebody who is not a control freak, who listens to his colleagues, who takes the temperature, and then they come to a decision by which they can all stick.
Well, I don't agree with Charles on that. I think it's been an extraordinary attack, and compared with what he wrote in an article recently and the very interesting ideas he's been expressing in speeches, I don't think that that people will want to pay much attention to those remarks. They should listen to some of the ideas and the initiatives he's been putting forward. They're actually very interesting. But what is important now is we recognize a number of clear facts. So just take a pause and just look at this coolly. First of all, Tony Blair's been the most successful Labour Prime Minister ever. A fact that nobody can dispute. Gordon Brown, I believe, will be an excellent successor because he is the twin architect of the success we've had as a Labour government these last 9 to 10 years, of the strongest economy anybody can remember, with more jobs in the country in our history, with low inflation, low mortgages, and economic growth on a continuous basis. Now that is down to Gordon Brown working in partnership with Tony Blair, who's been an excellent Prime Minister and still is. Now we've got to build on that. I do not think anybody could or should beat Gordon. He has my support, and I think he'll get the party's support. And let's put aside these personal squabbles which the public and certainly the party are fed up to the back teeth with.
Peter Hain, thank you for speaking to us. Well, we're going to change from politics to space now. We're going to take you live to pictures of the NASA space shuttle Atlantis standing on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. 6 astronauts have been sealed inside now for the last 2 hours or more in preparation for liftoff, which is due to take place in about 5 or 6 minutes' time.
T-minus
during
5 minutes.
its
5 minutes.
5 minutes time, as you can hear from Mission Control.
TLT, OTC, perform APU start.
We'll bring you that lift off. As it happens, we'll be there for the immediate countdown just before the launch. Stay with us. Meantime, police investigating the fatal shooting of a 15-year-old boy in Manchester say they don't think it was a random attack. The youth died in the early hours of the morning in the Moss Side area of the city.
A child's bike lies discarded next to the spot where the boy was found in the early hours. A police tent surrounds the scene as forensic teams carry out a fingertip search of the area. Officers took a call reporting the shooting just before 3 this morning and found the boy unconscious and unable to breathe. They say this was not a random shooting. It comes after a spate of violence in Moss Side caused by drug-related gang warfare. Police urged anyone with information to contact them and appealed for an end to the clashes.
This bucks the trend against what the community themselves have been trying to do. It's a sad event because there is so much work going on at grassroots level to tackle gun crime. I'm appealing for those who are involved in it to look at what's happened. We're dealing with a 15-year-old boy here, a 15-year-old boy who is now lying dead within this community. If there are people that can stop this and have the power to stop it, I'm asking them now to examine their consciences, think about the family, think about the community, and have the strength to put a stop to it.
It's not the first time local residents have had to deal with killings on their doorstep, but there is still a sense of shock.
I'm sad to know that another one of our young one has gone for apparently no reason. You know, this is terrible. Some mothers somewhere now is grieving.
But some local people express concern at the way the death has been handled so far by the police, in particular with regard to the victim's family.
And no one, not an officer, no one's been round to her house to tell her what's going on.
The boy was killed close to a popular community centre, which has also become part of this investigation. Only too conscious of the fear generated by gangs in this area, police have promised that the cause they desperately need in this murder inquiry will be treated with discretion. Kim Barnes, BBC News.
Back to Cape Canaveral now. Less than 3 minutes to lift off for the Space Shuttle Atlantis, one of the 3 shuttles left in the NASA fleet. And off comes the gantry, ready for the massive explosion of power which will lift this craft into the sky. Andy Gallagher's there. Andy, there's the gantry coming off. And just tell us what the conditions are like, because it had to be cancelled, this thing, 3 or 4 times already.
Yeah, we've had 2 weeks of major problems with Atlantis. Hurricane, Tropical Storm Ernesto led to a cancellation, a major lightning strike, and of course problems with the fuel cells and the fuel gauges, but it's all looking like a go now. We've got less than 3 minutes to go. This is of course a vital mission for NASA. Its sole purpose will be to continue refurbishing and installing the International Space Station. On board it's carrying 2 solar arrays which will help power that International Space Station. Of course all the astronauts are on board and we're down to the last couple of minutes now before launch.
And at the launch of course you get this massive release of power to shift the thing into the air. And what many people don't realize is a lot of the what looks like smoke at the base of the shuttle will not be smoke at all, it'll be steam, because thousands of tons of water are released onto the launch pad at the moment of ignition to damp down the blast itself and stop it spreading along the launch pad. So what you'll see is a massive explosion of steam as well as the rocket fuel itself. We've got less than a minute now.
That's right. I mean, yeah, once it takes off, it does leave this huge plume of steam, as you said, that stays in the air for a long time afterwards. I'm about 3 miles from launch pad 39B, and once the shuttle takes off, the sound will be terrific. You will hear it a couple of minutes after, 30 seconds into takeoff. So we're down to the last 30 seconds now for the Atlantis launch. This will be the 116th launch of the remaining shuttle fleet. As you said, there are 3 shuttles left, and they're all due to be retired in 2010. We'll let you listen into the last few seconds of the countdown, and then I'll talk once the shuttle actually launches.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3 main engines up and burning, 2, 1. And liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, opening a new chapter in the completion of the International Space Station for the collaboration of nations in space.
Roll program.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Houston is now controlling. Roll maneuver is underway. Atlantis is heading into a heads-down position on course for a 51.6 degree, 137 by 36 statute mile orbit. Atlantis already 2 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center at an altitude of 2.8 statute miles. Engines now at 72%, beginning to throttle back up as the vehicle passes through the area of maximum dynamic pressure.
Atlantis, Houston, go at throttle up.
Copy, go at throttle up.
All 3 liquid-fueled engines are back at full throttle. Minute 20 seconds into the flight. At liftoff, the fully fueled shuttle, boosters and external tank weighed about 4.5 million pounds. It now has burned half of that weight in propellant. Solid rocket boosters are burning 11,000 pounds of propellant every second. Coming up on 1 minute 45 seconds. Standing by for first stage separation of the solid rocket boosters. Atlantis is at an altitude of 129,000 feet, 24 miles in altitude, 25 miles downrange. All 3 engines are still performing as expected. SRB separation and staging confirmed. All 3 electrically producing fuel cells are operating as expected, as are the hydraulic systems, the auxiliary power units.
Andy, dangerous moments, but it looks as if it got away okay.
On the tail of Atlantis now.
Yeah, a successful launch. As I said, 2 weeks of extreme frustration, technical glitches, weather problems, but finally the Space Shuttle Atlantis has launched. It's pretty amazing just how quickly the craft disappears from Cape Canaveral here. Within 2 minutes you lose sight of it. It reaches speeds of something like 18,000 miles an hour within 8 minutes, so it's gone completely from here. It will later in the day dock with the International Space Station, where before it carries out that docking maneuver, it will actually flip over so the International Space Station can take a series of digital photographs of that underbelly to check for any damage to those vital heat shield ceramic tiles. Of course, there have been problems in the past with that and with insulating foam, but NASA does have a backup plan if there are any problems. The astronauts on board can go to the International Space Station, actually get off the Space Shuttle and go onto the International Space Station. And they've also proved with the last shuttle mission that they can carry out repairs now whilst in orbit. But this has been a long time. It's been very frustrating for NASA, but finally the Atlantis has launched, and of course they wanted to carry out another further 15 missions before the shuttle fleet is retired in 2010.
And we're getting pictures here, of course, from the onboard camera looking aft, and this is the camera that on the last ill-fated mission, which picked up the first clues that all was not well.
Yeah, that's why NASA have insisted on carrying out daytime launches since the Columbia disaster of 2003, so that they can utilize those external cameras to watch for any pieces of insulating foam breaking off during launch. That is, of course, what happened during the last launch, although that didn't do any damage. So no night flights since then. They have been talking about them, but after today's launch, they may not need to, because finally they managed to get Atlantis off the ground. No need to reschedule, and they can continue with the space program until the shuttle fleet is retired.
Now, what stage, Andy, does the main fuel tank come off?
The 2 rockets, the 2 external rockets you could see on launch, they were jettisoned about 2 minutes into the launch. They will land in the ocean, be recovered and can be reused again the main fuel tank, the red fuel tank you would have seen, that gets jettisoned and then it breaks up in the Earth's atmosphere and doesn't get reused again.
And on board there are 6 astronauts with a crucial mission, because they've really got to use all the time that's available to get the parts up to the International Space Station. And there's a heck of a lot of stuff to be shifted still.
There is indeed. It's going to be an 11-day mission. During that 11 days, they will carry out 3 spacewalks, and they are in fact delivering 2 huge solar arrays to the International Space Station, which will provide the International Space Station with 50% more power. Of course, the International Space Station has remained in orbit for the last 3.5 years without really being touched. So NASA are very keen to get that program going again and keep on delivering that equipment and refurbishing the International Space Station. I'm sorry, I probably can't hear you now because a NASA helicopter is either landing or taking off right behind me.
And we're still getting some fairly spectacular pictures from the onboard camera as we pick up the curvature of the Earth and the shadows cast by the sun. Wow, look at that. Andy, thank you for now. We'll get back to you as things develop, but we're getting those stunning pictures of the curvature of the Earth. The Space Shuttle Atlantis launched only just over 5 minutes ago, and look what it is already. It must be a breathtaking sight if you're actually on board. Pity to leave it, really. Well, things move on. The Prime Minister visits Israel later today as part of a renewed diplomatic push to bolster peace in the region. Our Jerusalem correspondent Matthew Price reports.
Israel's truce with Hezbollah is holding, but Israeli soldiers are still operating inside southern Lebanon. Tony Blair is coming to the region partly to make sure the ceasefire sticks. He's also coming to see what chance there is for talks between the Palestinians and Israelis. We set off to find out how both sides feel. First, a Palestinian.
We don't like Tony Blair.
Why not?
Because you know, and everywhere in this world, Tony Blair. He have many problems with the Muslim and with our Palestinian here and Iraq.
Next to West Jerusalem and an Israeli. Tony Blair's coming. Do you think he can achieve anything at the moment?
No, I think not.
Why not?
Why not? I don't think it's different from anybody else in the past.
Britain once ruled this biblical city. Today, though, Britain and indeed Tony Blair's influence here is questionable. For a start, Israel is coming out of a bloody conflict, and it's not exactly in the mood for major peace negotiations. As for the Palestinians, well, many of them are deeply frustrated with Tony Blair and simply don't believe he can offer them anything. Matthew Price, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Police investigating the fatal shooting of a 15-year-old boy in Manchester say they don't think it was a random attack. The youth died in the early hours of the morning in the Moss Side area of the city. Our correspondent Nick Ravenscroft is in Moss Side now.
It's still very much the early hours of the police investigation. As you would expect, they are still here, combing the park behind me for any scrap of evidence which would give some clue as to how this 15-year-old boy died and to who killed him. The community is still very, very upset. There has been a spate of shootings on Moss Side in the last month or two. There were 3 non-fatal last month, and in July on this very road, about 500 metres along, there was a man who was gunned down by 3 masked men in his home. And there is a real sense of shock here that there has been yet another person, another fatality added to that pretty grim tally already. I'm joined by a couple of people from the community, Chinya and Wendy. How's the feeling today, Wendy? What are people saying?
I mean, that's a stupid question straight away because, as you can see, we're here, and because we care, that's why we're here. We don't want this to be happening in our community anymore. Too many times this is happening and people walk away from it. I'm here and I'm prepared to stand up for our community, and we don't want no more here. Chinya is here also, and I'm sure she's here for the same reason as well. We don't want this in our community. And before I say anything else, my sympathy goes out to the family also this has happened to. I mean, it's a loss for our community, it's a loss for our family, and we really are sorry for the way this has happened, but what can we do? We are here to support whatever you can do as a family and as a community as well.
Are you happy with the police response?
Well, I don't know about that really and truly, because the way how things are dealt with, I'm never happy with how things are dealt with the police, but I'm sure they can rectify it and see, because it's like you have a job. When the chief goes away, the Indians was always there, so I don't know what happened there with the police as well, but the police can only do what they can do, and we as a community can only do is everybody together to make this thing work.
It's a very difficult day for the community because you've had so many shootings recently, and you know the fact is that it's bad for the reputation of Moss Side.
Definitely. There's definitely been, you know, some gun crime happening in Moss Side, but it's not the only thing that Moss Side is known for from my point of view, because living in Moss Side, from my point of view, is beautiful, and we've got a big sense of community. There's a lot of things going on, but this is a problem. This is a problem that does have to be solved, and the only way it's going to be solved is for the whole community to get together and to make it stop.
Well, I think we can catch up on the weather now. Sorry we lost that. But you'll all want to know whether we're going to get an Indian summer. And the man with all the answers is Alex Deakin.
Thanks very much, Peter. It's certainly lovely and sunny out there today. Will it last for the rest of the weekend? Well, yes, I think is the short answer. Overnight tonight, not as chilly as last night, but just like last night, we will again see some patches of fog around. Most places, though, having a dry and a fine evening out there. A little bit more cloud across the south. That should tend to melt away through the night. A bit more cloud across Shetland, perhaps even the odd spot of rain here and there. But for most of us, it's a dry night with clear spells. But we will see some patches of mist and fog through the Welsh Marches, eastern parts of Scotland and the Vale of York. But not as chilly as last night, although still in parts of Scotland we'll see temperatures dipping down into single figures. A fine start to the day here, though. There will be some patches of mist and fog for eastern parts of Scotland. Still a bit more cloud in Shetland, and there will be more cloud in the far northwest of Scotland too. Maybe even a little light rain. A bit more cloud for Northern Ireland. Here there will be a different feel to things, because just out to the west there is a bank of rain, and that will very slowly be creeping into western parts of Northern Ireland. So a little bit of rain here. Very gradually that rain pushing into the Western Isles of Scotland also. But elsewhere the mist and fog will clear, and then there'll be long sunny periods. Touch warmer than today as well. Temperatures 25, 26 Celsius in Bristol and London, generally up to about 21 in Glasgow and Newcastle. That's 70 Fahrenheit. Obviously cooler where we've got the rain in the far northwest. No rain at Edgbaston, though. Should be a cracking day for the last one-day international. England, of course, taking on Pakistan. Now, we hang on to the fine conditions across many central and eastern areas on Monday. Even warmer here, but further west, we do have more cloud and outbreaks of rain for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of Wales and southwest England. And that band of thicker cloud with some outbreaks of rain continues to very slowly creep its way eastwards into Tuesday. Some of that rain could be heavy by then, although the extreme east stays fine and stays very warm. Temperatures to 25 degrees Celsius. It's likely in Norwich. So subtle changes as we go through, particularly the middle part of the week, but plenty more sunshine to come tomorrow, and even warmer tomorrow. Temperatures in London up to 25 or 26 degrees Celsius. Much more weather information, bbc.co.uk/weather. Bye for now.
Get the headlines every 15 minutes here on BBC News 24.
What's wrong with Sammy? Is there blood on his face?
Do you know any reason why someone would have wanted Sammy dead? He was leaving you though, wasn't he?
Something's going on here.
I don't want to lose Ken on my team. Get out! He's guilty as sin.
The autumn special continues with a brand new case for DL and Pascoe tomorrow at 9 on BBC One.
You're watching BBC News 24. It's just coming up to 4:30, and in this half hour it's the Record Europe. That's after a summary of the news. Tony Blair has urged Labour to stop the bitter infighting over his leadership, warning it could lose them the next election. At a speech in London, he urged Labour activists to stop worrying about the polls and focus on policy challenges. He said personal attacks turn the public off. But it came as the former Home Secretary Charles Clarke launched a scathing attack on the character of the Chancellor. In an interview with the Daily Telegraph, Mr Clarke describes Gordon Brown as deluded and a control freak who can't work with people. Police in Manchester are investigating the shooting of a 15-year-old boy in the Moss Side area of the city. The teenager, who's not yet been named, was killed in the early hours of this morning near to a park. Detectives described the shooting as a planned attack. A NATO soldier and 40 suspected Taliban fighters have been killed in the latest fighting in southern Afghanistan. Senior NATO commanders meeting in Warsaw have urged members of the alliance to act quickly to send the extra soldiers and equipment needed in the country. The space shuttle Atlantis has finally blasted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida after 2 weeks of frustrating delays. The 6 astronauts are now on their way on a mission to resume construction of the International Space Station for the first time since the Columbia disaster 3.5 years ago. Scientists say that food allergies could be virtually eradicated by vaccines within 10 years. Researchers say a vaccine to cure hay fever could be produced within 5 years. Similar treatments for food and nut allergies would then follow within the next decade. Don't forget there's more on our interactive news service, BBC I, which works for you either on Freeview or digital satellite, as long as you remember to press the red button on your handset. That's a summary of the news, however, at 4:31. Now, on BBC News 24, it's time for the Record Europe.
From the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and welcome to the Record Europe. Well, MEPs are back from their summer break and they've been meeting in full session. As the deployment of troops from EU countries gets underway, here at the European Parliament, they've been discussing how the EU can help to bring about a lasting peace in the Middle East. Also on the programme, calls to cut the costs of interpretation. The European Union has 20 official working languages, but is it in danger of becoming a Tower of Babel? But first, many here at the European Parliament are saying the time has come for the European Union to play a key political role in the Middle East. From destruction in Lebanon, fresh hope. The UN truce between Israel and Hezbollah is in place now. The first Italian and French soldiers to police the peace are being deployed. And despite an unpromising start, EU countries will make up around half of the 15,000-strong UN force. Europe is also leading the push to revive peace talks and the so-called roadmap of 13 years ago with its two-state solution. But there's been deadlock since Hamas was elected in January to run the Palestinian Authority. The EU and others broke off contacts and financial support to the authority. The money is now being channeled indirectly, and some are suggesting it now is time to talk to Hamas. This week, the Finnish presidency of the EU told MEPs that the European Union was committed to playing a leading role, a sentiment echoed in the MEPs' own resolution.
No matter how unitedly, cohesively and effectively the EU acts, it is obvious that we cannot achieve peace through our own efforts alone. We need to work closely together with all our partners in the Quartet, and in particular with the United States, as well as with the Arab League. Above all, we need to, of course, to push the parties themselves, for them to come to the table and seriously engage in negotiations.
Earlier this week, the Palestinian Authority's representative to the EU, Leila Shahid, was speaking to MEPs. She welcomed the EU's pledge of aid to the region and its commitment to provide troops, but she was not uncritical.
It boosted the spirits of those who had faith in the EU, but who despaired of seeing the EU acting in this part of the world. We had the feeling in recent years that Europe was often absent from questions concerning the peace process in the Middle East. There are also, in parallel with this crisis situation, serious negotiations aimed at setting up a government of national coalition, which could offer the possibility of ending the political, financial and diplomatic isolation, which was a form of war declared on a government that was democratically elected in January in Palestine, an election which of course was recognised by the Europeans as being democratic.
Leila Shahid there talking earlier this week here in Strasbourg. She, of course, is the representative to the EU from the Palestinian Authority. And I'm joined now by 4 MEPs, all of whom have been taking part in this week's debate. Luisa Morgantini, who's an independent from Italy, part of the Nordic Green Left group in the Parliament, also the chair of the Development Committee. Alex Lambsdorff, who is a German Liberal MEP and spokesman for his party on foreign affairs here at the Parliament. Richard Howitt, who is a Labour MEP and a spokesman for Labour on foreign affairs, also on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Charles Tannock, who speaks for the British Conservatives and also the European People's Party on foreign affairs. Can I ask you, first of all, Charles Tannock, I mean, we heard there from Leila Shahid. We've heard from the Finnish foreign minister at the last informal gathering of EU foreign ministers, although he slightly backtracked, that it is perhaps time now to review the decision not to talk to Hamas and to get everybody round the table following the clear failure of military action anyway in Lebanon.
I totally reject that position. I think the EU must be very firm in its position it's taken in declaring Hamas a banned terrorist organization. Hamas has not renounced terrorist violence. Only a few months ago it supported the suicide Passover bombing, which killed innocent Israeli civilians. It does not recognize the right of the State of Israel to exist between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, i.e. it wants to eradicate the State of Israel, full stop, and kill as many Jews as possible. It remains a dogmatic, Islamist, fundamentalist party. If you read their charter of 1988, it's full of all sorts of rather bigoted statements. Certainly if I were a woman or a homosexual living under a Hamas government, if they really do implement the Sharia law, which they are intent on doing, if they get an opportunity, I think it would be totally against all the fundamental values that we have signed up to in the European Union. So no to Hamas, I'm afraid, and we must support Abu Mazen, the president, and find ways of bypassing Hamas through the temporary international mechanism of delivering funds to the ordinary Palestinian people.
And yet we're told there is some movement, and there was movement before this latest violence in Lebanon.
Well, I think there is a big movement inside Palestine. Of course, there are a lot of problems, a lot of conflicts also inside Palestine, but it's normal because the people who live under 37 years of occupation in a terrible situation, in cage and in prison, it cannot be so easy to fight. But I don't agree with Tannock. I think that really the European Union should open up to Hamas, not to Hamas as a terrorist organization, but to the Hamas who has been elected legitimate, like everyone recognized, to the Palestinian government. The Hamas who choose to not to shoot and not to kill for a long time. Hamas who decided to enter into the democratic arena.
But
so
who have failed to recognize Israel and renounce violence.
No, I'm not sure like that, because, for example, now the discussion that is supporting too, Abu Mazen and Hamas are discussing very clearly, and they are nearly, if they are not every day bombing and arresting member of parliament from Israel, they could have already reached a solution, which is a government of national unity, which is based not on nothing, is based exactly on the recognition of the agreements which has been signed by the PLO, and recognizing that the Palestinian state is on the land which was occupied in 1967, which means recognition, in fact, also of the state of Israel. So I think it's time to look at the suffering of the Palestinian and the Israeli people and to find a solution. The kind of position like Tannock is not helping any kind of solution, it's just helping people to go on and kill each other. And I think we have to put an end to this violence.
Leila Shahid said there were negotiations going for a government of national unity. So maybe there is movement in the Palestinian Authority. Is it time for the EU to also move a little? Do you think it was right to have taken such a dogmatic or firm rather than dogmatic stand at the beginning?
What should our real aim be? To get people who were formerly shooting and killing into the democratic process. And coming from Britain, where we've got the experience of Ireland, of precisely that, former terrorists joining a political and peaceful process. That's what we should be trying to achieve in the Middle East. Now, as far as Hamas is concerned, it's absolutely right that we had some very clear principles that remain true today on recognition for peace and security of Israel, for non-violence, and so on. But the prisoners' initiative, what the Hamas prisoners themselves have concluded in the jails, part of the negotiations for the national unity government that Louisa was just referring to, has been described by journalists as being a million miles from the 1988 Charter that the Conservatives were talking about. And if we just want to rigidly stay in the past, we're going to stay in the conflict of the past. And I do believe that Europe, and I was an election observer, having recognised the elections as true and democratic and fair, has to recognise the consequences of those elections. And whilst it's going to be a big step to go to direct talks straight away with Hamas, I've myself floated the idea of an intermediary, perhaps Turkey, which is listened to on both sides of the divide, undertaking direct talks on our behalf. We have to move this peace process forward.
Do you forget about the demand then to recognise Israel and renounce violence, which is what the EU was, you know, does that just go out the window?
The Prisoners' Initiative, the National Unity Government, is talking about recognising the 1967 borders. That's about a Palestine, of course, within the 67 borders, but it's about Israel outside of them. And, you know, frankly, Israel is building a security barrier.
It's not also time for Israel to recognize the state of Palestine. Should be also reciprocity in their action.
But, I mean, Richard just said it. We are forgetting the very clear principles that we set out after the elections. Let me say first that simply the fact that Hamas was elected democratically does not make it a legitimate political organization. I come from Germany in 1933. The Nazis were elected democratically. So that in and of itself does not make Hamas a legitimate interlocutor. Point. I mean, full stop. This is very important to recognize. We are in a dilemma. We need to talk to the Palestinians. We cannot have peace in the region without the Palestinians. And I believe bypassing Hamas, talking to Abu Mazen, is the right way. If the Palestinians come up with a government of national unity and determine that the president will be speaking on their behalf, fine, we can talk to them and we can find a solution. But the principles that Richard just mentioned, we cannot throw them out of the window. The EU would really be selling its core values.
But I mean, a government of national unity, would you be prepared, would you shift your position, Charles Tannock, and those
I'm
who
always
think like you?
flexible, and I need to look at it when it comes up, if it happens, if it indeed happens as Richard is predicting. But I am still deeply nervous. Of course, if Hamas genuinely recognize the state of Israel's right to exist, genuinely renounce violence and are shown to do so, release Corporal Shalit, stop launching Qassam rockets, etc., then of course I will talk to them.
Look, I'm not a defender of Hamas because I'm a woman and I'm really very concerned about religious fundamentalists. So whenever there is a religious fundamentalist organization, for me, it's hell. But I don't really think this is the situation with Hamas. Hamas is not...
They want Sharia law and a caliphate in their charter. Caliphate they talk about.
Sorry, Tano, but you don't know enough about it. Go there and most of the time and see and speak also to Hamas leader. And speak also to Hamas leader. They said, of course they would like to have a Sharia law, but they said it will be a referendum and they are not applying it anyway. But this is not the question. The question, I think it is that I really hope that Hamas, and I would like that Hamas will not make any sort of civil attentat, because I think that this is crime like the Israelis were bombing and killing Palestinians. It's a crime against any kind of law. In the same time, I think it's very important also to be able to give the Palestinians some security together with the Israelis. It's not possible, for example, that we are just asking to the Palestinians who are under occupation, a brutal occupation, we are always asking to them. I think we should have the courage to say, should stop Hamas any kind of violence, but they demonstrated they didn't do it for a longer time.
Let's just learn lessons for history. What is it that got Hamas elected? It was the fact that the oppression of the Palestinian people, the failure of there to be negotiations with the former Fatah leadership, even after the death of Arafat, the continuing peace and insecurity bred conditions where the Palestinian people were attracted to extremist
Well, you could also argue that the EU failed to put the lid on corruption, and they reacted to that.
I accept legitimate questions there, but do we want to repeat the mistakes of the past? If we seek to simply isolate, bypass Hamas, and don't recognise the position they're in, we will simply drive moderate, peaceful opinion amongst the Palestinian people more into their arms. That cannot be in our interest.
Can I just change tack slightly, because we need to, Alex Lansdorff, we need to change tack slightly. I mean, and it is connected, isn't it, what happened in Lebanon? And Do you think the fact now that the EU has committed, EU member states have committed troops, so many troops, they're leading it essentially to the UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon, does that give the EU a chance now to play a real role with real influence and increase its credibility where it hasn't necessarily before?
Fundamentally, I think that that is the case. We have traditionally been the biggest sponsor in the region. We've been the biggest donor in the region. We are involved in infrastructure projects and humanitarian help. We've done all these things. However, we were not really being taken seriously in the region because it's a region where other qualities count as well. And unfortunately, it's unfortunate, of course, military presence now is going to enhance the EU's role. It's going to enhance Europe's role. The challenge for us is to get our act together, to come up with a coherent policy towards the region. And as you say, of course these topics are interconnected. You cannot discuss Israel and Palestine without looking at the triangle Lebanon, Syria, Israel as well.
Okay, you talk about getting your act together. I mean, some say that in the immediate aftermath of the airstrikes on Lebanon, the EU failed spectacularly to achieve consensus and to come up with an immediate call for a ceasefire. Now, we've been speaking to the Commissioner for External Affairs for the EU, Benita Ferrero-Waldner, and this is what she said when I put that point to her.
We do not have a communitarian foreign policy. We have only a policy that is the result of 25 different member countries' opinions. And we have brought them together to one important opinion, and that was cessation of hostilities. Of course, some would have liked to go further for an immediate ceasefire and an immediate strong truce. But unfortunately, not all the 25 were backing this opinion. But everybody wanted to go ahead to find a possibility to ending the military action as soon as possible. And in the end, this was possible. And now I think we have to work to make this really happen. And we in the Commission, we are also already working for the early recovery. That means reconstruction of Lebanon.
Commissioner Ferrero-Waldner there. Richard, do you not think that the failure of member states to agree, to achieve a consensus on an immediate ceasefire in the immediate aftermath of this conflict shows the impossibility of ever really getting a common foreign security policy for the EU?
Well, I think as we meet, the key pressing priority is not the institutional arrangements in Europe, but dealing with the Middle East conflict. But taking your question...
Yeah, but if the EU wants to be a major force, it has to have a consistent, coherent position.
And so the test in this case is how effective were we? I absolutely regret the delay in achieving the ceasefire. I think there was far too much loss of innocent life and needless destruction.
Tony Blair supported it.
And Britain, along with not just America, but actually Germany, the Netherlands, the Czech Republic, and others took the position that there should be a long-lasting and effective ceasefire that could be delivered, and the statements on their own weren't enough.
So do you think your government was wrong to make that delay?
Well, people will make their own judgments about that, but for those who want to use this in some sort of way to just knock Europe again, you know, it was Europe that cooperated very effectively on the evacuation of people within Lebanon. That is the only show in town when it comes to humanitarian assistance, driving in that aid to people who most need it. And in a week, when it looked like the United Nations force wouldn't happen, with great credit to the Italians, they called on the other EU member states, and in less than a week, the pledges came in to enable the European contribution to the UN force. So yeah, we can have discussions about what happens in the corridors in Brussels, but Europe is actually playing its part and can continue to do so.
Do you agree? Do you have a positive view of it, Alex Lambsdorff?
Well, first of all, I mean, the immediate ceasefire, I believe, was a wrong idea to start with because, I mean, Hezbollah had been sending rockets into Israel for 2 years or so, for years before that, and after a few days there was this call for the immediate ceasefire when Israel retaliated, essentially. So I think it was not a failure to achieve something that was wrong. However, institutionally speaking from the point of view of getting our act together, I believe that we really need to discuss the Brussels decision-making procedures. The Commissioner said it clearly. We do not have one communitarian, she called it, foreign policy. We only have 25 member states who get together and they either agree or they don't. And from topic to topic, this varies. I think we need to change this in the concert of global powers of the 21st century. Europe can only do it together. We will not be able to do it as Germany, as Britain, as Italy. We are all, on the global scale, too small for that.
Would you agree with that, Louisa?
I think it was very important for the European Union to play an active and political role, because I think we should be fed up of having the European Union to play the role of humanitarian aid. We should tackle the political question. The political question in the Middle East is the core of the occupation of the Palestinian territory. So I think that for the first time, the Europeans are playing a role, not because it's only military, because they show the impartiality of being there, trying to make the ceasefire, and they were accepted both by the Lebanese, by Hezbollah, which is part of the government of Lebanon, and by Israel. So I think this is important. It's the first step. I think we can go on and see finally peace for everybody, but we need to end the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza.
Louisa, of course, the point is this is not an EU mission. This is a United Nations, a UNIFIL enhanced role in which there are EU member states as UN member states participating with countries which are not from Europe, like Bangladesh, Malaysia and so on. This is not an EU mission, and I don't actually think that the evacuation was that well done, to be honest. It was done entirely by member states for their own citizens primarily, not on an EU coordinated basis. And the smaller countries had huge problems in getting their citizens out from the Lebanon. But no, I think it's absolutely essential that all the member states, including my country and primarily my country, must retain its national veto in areas of key national foreign policy interests. We cannot have some kind of single foreign policy imposed on us by the other member states. If we have a different view, we have to be allowed to go our own way. In most instances, we will have a common position, like in Africa, the Balkans, North Korea, whatever. But in key areas of the world where we have a different view from the French or the Germans, it would be intolerable to my party and the British people to be told we have to toe the line of the Germans.
Very briefly, Alex.
Yeah. No, I fundamentally disagree. I believe that 55 million Brits, 80 million Germans, 50 million Italians, compared 65 million Italians, compared to 1 billion Chinese, 280 million Americans, 1 billion Indians, how are we going to lend weight to our positions? We can only do it together.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there. Let's have a look now at what else has been going on here in Strasbourg this week.
The Bulgarian Prime Minister was in Strasbourg to reassure the EU about its membership bid and worries about organised crime in the country. He said reforms would be completed in time.
I think it is evident for the Bulgarian citizens, also for the experts of the European Commission, and we shall expect on that basis a fair treatment and achievement of our goal to join the Union in January 2007.
MEPs backed a report calling for EU-wide laws to defend the rights of people suffering from mental health problems and promote best practice. 58,000 people commit suicide in the EU every year.
And my message has always been that, look, it could be me, it could be you, it could be my children, my mother, it could be any of us who need this sort of care.
MEPs are calling for a review next year of a controversial agreement to hand over information about air passengers flying from the EU to the United States. Earlier this year, the European Court of Justice ruled that there was no legal base for the deal. MEPs say the anti-terror measures go too far.
Yes, we want to share data, but no more than necessary in order to achieve the purpose, namely fighting terrorists and criminals.
And Scottish Executive Minister Alan Wilson was in Strasbourg lobbying against proposals which could threaten Scotland's vodka industry. Poland and Finland want an EU-wide definition of vodka that would ensure it's only distilled from potatoes or grain.
It's a highly prized principle in the European Union. Multilingualism in the EU institutions is seen as a vital way of communicating with the citizens and vice versa. But is the price of interpretation costing taxpayers too much?
The European Union has 20 official working languages. From January, Irish will become its 21st. This week, MEPs voted through a report which calls for ways of cutting the costs of interpretation in the EU. Parliament's been responding to a detailed study by the Court of Auditors. The report says that the costs of interpreting a full day's meeting at the European Parliament using all 20 official languages with 3 interpreters per booth comes to around €118,000. That's nearly £80,000 a day. But with interpretation only offered in English, French and German, those costs would drop dramatically to €8,900 a day. That's around £6,000. The report also says that across the EU institutions, 16% of interpretation costs were due to cancelled and unused services. Why do you think that we needed to tackle this problem, though?
Well, two reasons. One is basic communication. I think it's very important people understand each other when we're talking to each other in the plenary. And the second one, of course, is money. I mean, if 16% out of the European Union's or the European Parliament's interpretation services are on interpretation that has been asked for but not used, then I think we have a problem and we need to raise awareness.
Sean O'Naughton, as one of the Irish-speaking MEPs here, you presumably support the idea of Irish becoming the 21st official working language of the EU from January. But isn't this a classic example of pragmatism going out the window and politics and symbolism taking place, which is the sort of thing Alex Stubb presumably wants to get rid of?
No, I don't believe so. I think the introduction of Irish is indeed very practical as far as I'm concerned, because I want to speak in my own language. This is a borrowed language I have, and I don't and I should not have to use it because there is a facility there to interpret through the means of other languages, and Irish should be afforded that opportunity as well as any other language. I believe in the concept of multilingualism. I believe in the Europe that we are trying to very, very hard to put together in that format, and therefore I think language is a very, very important ingredient of how we mix that, and that the overall cost is a very small price to pay in the project we are putting together.
Not that small, hundreds of millions. But
well, I think Sean's English is quite fluent, actually. I mean, to be honest, I come from a bilingual family. I speak Swedish, my father, Finnish with my mother. At the same time, I feel it's very important that when I communicate in the plenary or in a committee, people understand me. Therefore, I usually use English or French or German. And I think it's a little bit of a waste of money if someone speaks fluent English, comes from a language where English is the mother tongue and an official language, to start using other languages.
Would you be happy to do away with the Finnish interpreters?
No, not totally, because there are people, there are Finns who can't speak English. And I think I agree with Sean here, it would be undemocratic to require everyone to not speak their mother tongue. But Irish, that's 3 MEPs out of 734. I think perhaps we could rationalise a little bit.
Well, more than 3 MEPs in Ireland can speak Irish, and more than 3 MEPs well. But to have the opportunity to do so, for example, I believe at present I'm the only MEP in the whole Parliament denied speaking one's national mother tongue language. Therefore, I think the opportunity should be there. That is enshrined in the treaties, in the rule books, and therefore, let's have it.
Well, that's all from me and my guests here in Strasbourg. I'll be back again next week in Brussels. Hope you'll join us then. Bye for now.
Rain getting into the west come the afternoon, but very warm in the sunshine. A bit more rain coming into the west on Monday. Bye for now.
Get the headlines every 15 minutes here on BBC News 24.
Ben Fogle can be a very persuasive young man. He can coax you down a freezing, plummeting Arctic shaft.
You okay?
Entice you into a treacherous swamp simmering with anaconda.
You're doing so well.
And lure you up a towering mountain though parched and gagging for oxygen.
You're doing brilliantly.
Ben Fogle can be a very persuasive young man.
I didn't make them do it. They wanted to.
Extreme Dreams, pushing people to their absolute limit, whether they like it or not. Monday at 6:30 on BBC Two.
And we're not going to win if we have personal attacks by anybody on anyone, because it turns the public off and makes them think we're interested again in ourselves and not in them.
In his first speech since announcing he's to go within a year, the Prime Minister tells his party to stop squabbling. But the leadership row continues. Charles Clarke delivers another ferocious attack on Gordon Brown, calling him deluded and a control freak. Shuttle diplomacy. Excuse me. The Prime Minister arrives in the Middle East to bolster peace in the region. A 15-year-old boy is shot dead in Manchester's Moss Side. Police say it was a planned attack.
6, 5, 3 main engines up and burning, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle.
And a successful launch for NASA's latest mission at the 5th time of asking. Thrills and spills in the Merseyside derby as Liverpool come unstuck against the Toffee men. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News 24. Tony Blair has made a public appeal for an end to personal attacks as the infighting over the Labour leadership continues. He said the party can remake itself before the next election, but not if it continues to behave as it has in the past week. Mr Blair's comments come after the former Home Secretary Charles Clarke launched another ferocious attack on Gordon Brown, calling him deluded and a control freak. Here's Robin Crystal.
Wherever he goes, it seems Tony Blair is dogged by protest. Security keeps some at bay, but not those from within his own ranks. His long goodbye from Downing Street is proving harder to manage by the day. Saying he'll go by next September hasn't been enough. After a week of bitter bloodletting, the Labour Party is still feuding over who'll succeed him.
There was something sort of irredeemably old-fashioned about it, I'm afraid. You know, the attacks on the leader responds, the briefings, the counter-briefings, the statutory trade union leader out at the end of the week saying the leader's got to go. The only thing we didn't have was the smoke-filled room, and that's because we banned those.
But dissent isn't banned, and he addressed it head-on.
We can remake ourselves. But we can only do it not by behaving like we did last week, but by behaving like we did when we were hungry for power. And we're not going to win if we have personal attacks by anybody on anyone, because it turns the public off and makes them think we're interested again in ourselves and not in them.
But that's proving impossible after a second assault on his likely successor Gordon Brown in just 2 days from the former Home Secretary Charles Clarke. Yesterday he called him stupid, stupid, stupid for not stamping on attacks on Tony Blair. Today, writing in the Daily Telegraph, he gets really personal. Gordon Brown is deluded, he says, if he thinks that Tony Blair will simply anoint him as the next Prime Minister. He is rather a control freak whose massive weakness is he can't work with other people. He has psychological issues and is totally uncollegiate.
These personal attacks, coded or otherwise, have really got to stop. I feel very strongly about that. I met my local party in Neath last night at our regular meeting, and they're fed up to the back teeth with it. They can't understand why senior figures in the party are being so self-indulgent.
No attacks, coded or otherwise, from former Minister Alan Milburn, who remains close to Tony Blair.
How well do you think the Prime Minister's coping at the moment, Mr Milburn?
Silence for now, but the consummate Blairite outrider could well launch his own leadership bid. Leaving domestic strife behind him, Tony Blair has travelled to Jerusalem and he'll be meeting Israeli and Palestinian leaders. But back home, the conflict over his departure date and his successor rages unabated. Robin Crystal, BBC News.
Well, Mark Sanders is at the venue where Tony Blair was speaking and joins us live now. Mark, Tony Blair was among friends today, and he was in his best sort of self-deprecating form. In a way, he wasn't doing Gordon Blair any favours with that, because that's not the sort of thing that Gordon Brown finds easy.
Indeed. I mean, I think we were really, in a sense, almost getting a valedictory today. The sort of Tony Blair as we know him, the Tony Blair who I think many people, quite frank, within the Labour Party, despite the animosity of the last week, will miss. I think what was very interesting today, though, is the fact that in light of Charles Clarke's comments, there was a realisation and an enforcement from the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office that the fighting and the sniping had to stop if Labour were to have any particular chance of winning the next general election. Now, one will be asking, why is Charles Clarke doing this now and doing it in such a way? Well, I think what he's doing is saying in public many of the things that some of the Blairites are thinking in private and cannot say in public. You saw there Alan Milburn, who's usually not camera shy, keeping his own counsel, wouldn't answer any of my questions, even when I was saying, how do you think the Prime Minister is going? Such is the sensitivity at the moment of this whole leadership row within the party.
Well, Mark, despite Tony Blair's plea for everyone to cool it and behave themselves, are the Blairites now actively plotting the Stop Brown campaign?
I think some Blairites are, but it was very interesting in your interview with Peter Hain, one of the key modernisers of the cabinet, that he thinks, in terms of an antidote to the poison within the party at the moment, that the whole party should back Gordon Brown as the next leader. Now, of course, he's got a personal interest in this. He has ambitions to be the deputy leader, but I think there is a clear feeling now, following Charles Clarke's intervention today, that there are some Blairites who would like to take Gordon Brown on. And I think there are those, perhaps Alan Milburn, perhaps John Reid, even perhaps the Education Secretary Alan Johnson, who are prepared to put up and not shut up.
But there's no sign here, is there, that Tony Blair is prepared to make things any easier for Gordon Brown. He's not repeating that he's his man and that he should be crowned king.
And I think there are those Brownites who believe that Gordon Brown is owed some kind of endorsement before Tony Blair goes. But of course there are those around the Prime Minister, some of those within Downing Street, who feel that the way that Gordon Brown has behaved over the last few weeks, and specifically about that broad grin that was fixed on Gordon Brown's face following that acrimonious meeting in Downing Street, that Gordon Brown does not deserve to be the next Prime Minister. And I think the attention now is focusing less about Tony Blair's departure, but more in a sense about the possibility of a Gordon Brown arrival. Given his actions, or rather inactions, in failing to call the dogs off this week, what is he going to be like as Prime Minister? Does he have the judgment to run this country?
Mark Sanders, thank you. Well, in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister has arrived in Israel as part of a renewed diplomatic push to bolster peace in the region. Matthew Price is outside Prime Minister Ehud Olmert's compound in Jerusalem, where Tony Blair is expected shortly. Matthew, what's he hoped to achieve?
Well, I would have thought, bearing in mind the problems that Tony Blair's had at home over the last few days, he would be hoping to draw a line under that. Although this visit was organised well before those problems erupted, I would have thought that rather than looking like a beleaguered domestic leader, he hopes once again to start looking like an international statesman travelling around the world trying to sort out the world's problems. His staff say specifically he has come here both to ensure that the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah that came into effect and ended the war in Lebanon. He's come here to really press the Israelis, certainly, to make sure that that ceasefire holds. And then also, of course, there's the whole huge issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mr. Blair is expected to talk to leaders from both sides, not to make any major announcements, we're told by Downing Street, but rather to talk to them, to try and start a process that might eventually lead to dialogue between the Israelis and Palestinians.
What sort of reception is he likely to get in practice? Because, after all, he's a Prime Minister who's set a time limit on his time in office. Won't all the diplomatic bags from London to back home will be full of assessments of Gordon Brown? The question I want to ask Tony Blair, surely, is tell us about Brown.
Absolutely, Peter, and I think when the journalists follow Tony Blair into the Prime Minister's residence here in Jerusalem behind me in the coming hours, he's due to hold a press conference. It's due to be live. It'll be interesting to see whether Tony Blair takes any questions, because presumably from the travelling British press pack, all those questions are going to be about Blair's future and the future of the British government and indeed its foreign policy. Now, In public, of course, the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership are both saying they fully welcome Tony Blair's presence here, that they're looking forward to talking to him. I think in the back of their minds they're all going to be wondering, well, does Tony Blair and what he says here today and over this weekend, does that mean that that is going to be British government policy for the coming months and years, or is that policy likely to change? I think there's also another interesting point to note. Here in Israel, in Jerusalem, Tony Blair is going to be welcomed. I think the Israelis, broadly speaking, feel that the British government, British foreign policy, Tony Blair's foreign policy, has been pretty much on the side of Israel. They feel it's been relatively supportive of Israel over the last few years. That's not the feeling privately amongst Palestinian politicians. Today, the Palestinian Prime Minister said that Tony Blair's policy had been one-sided. The Palestinian president doesn't go quite that far in public, but I think it's clear from background talks with some of his officials that the Palestinians really feel that their suffering has been ignored, not just by Britain over previous years, but also by other members of the international community. And they presumably, the Palestinians presumably, will be pressing Tony Blair very hard to try and get some more work done on aiding the Palestinians politically and diplomatically.
Does Tony Blair still have respect in some of the capitals of the Middle East?
It's a tough question. I mean, officially, yes, he does. Officially, he would be welcomed to most, if not all, of those capitals. But I do detect over the last few years that there has been a change in the way that certainly the Arab street sees Tony Blair, and also the way the Arab leadership sees Tony Blair. I remember when I first arrived here in the Middle East a few years ago that people just out on the street, I'm talking about ordinary people here, would ask where I was from, and I would say I was from Britain, and they would give me a smile and a welcome. Nowadays that does happen, but it doesn't always happen, and I think whatever the British government says, that foreign policy is not affecting the way that the Arab world views Britain, that is not the impression I get when I'm out on the streets, either in the Palestinian areas, recently in Jordan and in other Arab countries. I think there is a deep mistrust now amongst the Arab street of Britain's foreign policy and Tony Blair specifically. Within the capitals, as I say, officially talking to the Arab leadership and the Palestinian leadership here, they say they welcome Tony Blair, but they want him to put his money where his mouth is. They want him not just to talk words of peace, they want him to come up with deeds that they, the Arabs and the Palestinians, regard as fair deeds and not deeds that they regard as one-sided and pro-Israel.
Matthew Price in Jerusalem. Straight to Tel Aviv Airport, where our political editor Nick Robinson, who travelled with Tony Blair, is waiting to talk to us. Nick, did the Prime Minister come and talk to all the hacks on the aeroplane?
Not this time, Peter, no. I think he is once bitten, many times shy. You may recall that the other great issue of the day, not Middle East peace, of course, but peace in the Labour Party, was something he did once talk about on a foreign trip, and I think ever since then he's rather regretted it. And therefore we didn't get to see him. We did hear from his spokesman, and what was noticeable is how keen he was to talk about this trip, about what he hoped to achieve, and how unkeen he was to talk about anything in the Labour Party, in particular those attacks on Gordon Brown.
But his foreign policy is one of the things which is really seems to be a really annoying element in his party. They want that changed. Does he show any sign that he'll use this trip to send any different signals?
Well, he'll certainly use it to send the signal that he is serious about trying to get the process of talks going again between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, you may recall that he's been doing this for a long